So let it be written. So let it be done. This is Tabletop Terrors. Today we're doing a deep dive on prep. Now, I'm bringing my problems to the table. I don't have much in the way of top secret information, but it turns out here before we start recording, Mr. Jeff Doty's like, well, I do have, and he worded it this way, I do have a bit of a top secret tip I can give her. Why wasn't this in the original video? So what is your tip, your hack, your prep hack?
Yeah, so it turns out in my infinite genius, the reason it wasn't in the first video is because I forgot that I do this until after we did that. So it just ended up like, oh, wait, yeah, I should have said. So, and the whole top secret thing is a bit cheeky because I know plenty of people who do this, but there are some people who do this, and I've just outright stolen it. A lot of people have problems with planning a lot of prep around a session, and then they have it all ready. They're all set, and then the players show up, and then the players decide to go completely off the rails in a different direction. They're just like, oh, actually, we're going to do this. We want to figure out what's going on here or over there. And just like, I spent, 4 hours prepping all these characters and all these scenes, and then they show up and they want to do something completely different. So I have a way to completely avoid it. And it's going to sound so stupid and so obvious, but so few GMs do this, and the GMs who do, never have a problem with prep. Before the game happens, ask the players, hey guys, what are you going to do next session? What do you want to do? What are you interested in? Where are you going to go? Are you going to follow this storyline, or are you going to follow this goal that you were trying to do? And then the players will say, oh, actually, yeah, this merchant character is super interesting to us. I'd like to kind of see what's going on with him. Okay, cool. I'll plan for that. And then you plan the merchant character that they're interested in. And then you lead into the session with that, and it's just, it seems like such like a light bulb, duh moment, but I see it happen so rarely, but it's totally okay to just go to your players and say, hey, what about, we finished up this session with a couple threads. Which ones do you want to follow? And then whatever they tell you, you plan for them, you plan those threads, and then you go into it. And that way, you almost never have wasted prep because you know what the players are intending to do. And sometimes things happen, surprises happen. You can never perfectly account for all situations. But that's an easy way that I found to avoid prepping something that never gets used because the players go in a different direction because you kind of just make a deal beforehand of this is kind of the broad direction of where we're going to go. And then you just let it happen.
Yeah. I think a lot of the times people... Again, GMs often feel so burdened with so much of what needs to happen. Whether it's they feel like it's not okay to simply tell the players, no, that was the guy that did the thing. You just forgot about it. It's almost treated a little too sacredly because you're right, Jeff. There's nothing wrong with just asking them, what do you guys plan on doing? But it's almost like some GMs need to feel like they have the permission to do that, to just ask the players, what do you want to do? If this happens next session, what do you guys think you'll do? The goal is to have fun in the game, and it certainly shouldn't be at the expense of the GM spending 10 hours prepping because there's 3 threads they could follow, and now they have to flesh them all out, only to throw 2 away because, well, they went this way. And it's like, well, if you just consider that social contract you have with the players, there's nothing wrong with, like you said, asking them, telling them, and then, things that we've talked about in the past, saying, hey, I didn't plan on that. Give me 1 minute to figure it out. It's like you're all here to have fun. So make sure you're constantly after that goal and you're not burdening yourself so much with being the one that creates the fun.
Yeah. And I think with social media now, it's so easy to keep track of this stuff. There isn't a game that I play in that I don't have a Facebook thread, or a group chat or a private group, whatever. It's so easy to just pop out, hey, what are you guys thinking of doing? And then not only can you reply, but everyone can see your reply and go, oh yeah, +1, or, oh, well, if that was the merchant, I was also interested in, the guard who seemed to be acting suspiciously. So that's actually really, really smart. And it's funny because you say that it is a bit of a duh moment because all the games that I love playing in do that. And I've never quite put my finger on that pulse. But I'm so happy to answer the question when it's asked. So it's like, you're right. It's like, oh my God, that's. But I think too, again, you guys mentioned this. We've talked about it a couple of times. James, you just said it. I believe game masters do have a sense of feeling really good when you do that cool, surprising thing that makes everyone feel like, oh. But you can't risk what you just said, which is that's not worth. You just spent your 4 last consecutive lunch breaks on prep that's not going to just ever see the light of day, because now, whether you subconsciously or consciously realize it, you might actually resent the way they went.
Yeah.
And so that's interesting.
And I mean, it helps too as a player, because it gives you the opportunity to tell the GM the things that you want out of the game too. So it helps both sides of the table. Like if my GM comes up and says like, "Hey, what do you want to do next session?" And I say, "Actually, I'd really love to have a scene with Tim's character because we figured out this secret about our shared connection in the past, and I'd love to kind of be able to have like an emotional confrontation scene of like, and be able to talk that over with him." And then like as a player, I know I'm going to get what I want out of the next session because the GM's going to take their time to put that into the game because they know I want it. And as a GM, you have like a free 30 minutes of your session planned for you that you didn't have to do anything for because you asked the players what they were going to do. And they said, "Oh, I want to talk to Tim about this event that happened." And then you could just say, "Okay, the session opens. Jeff and Tim's character, you guys are out, here, and you'll have a second alone." And then, I can just go in and be like, "Hey, in character, blah, whatever, blah, blah, blah." So like it helps both sides of the table. Like it helps the GM prep, but also as a player, it makes sure that you get what you want out of the game. Like it's for me, just a universally good way to prep.
Exactly. And that idea that I keep harping on, the idea that you're all there to have fun, you're just in different roles. It's just important to remember that because like you said, Jeff, it helps both sides of the table and everybody enjoys it more. The GM potentially preps a little bit less. And like you said, kind of has some of it done for them. They know they've got that time set aside for, what are the players going to do? What are they going to say to this person? You also have I have to prep a little bit less and I can really put time in what I know they're going to do so that, again, everybody's enjoying themselves and having fun. Another thing that I think is related to this, but is definitely its own whole tangent. I bring that up because people are very starkly contrasted on this idea. So if it's not for you, that's okay. For me, I prep things that can happen. And if the players do something that is a little unexpected, I move that situation into where they did go. This is, sort of this illusion of choice where some people are very divided on this topic. I personally, it happens so much in like video games that I don't mind. Like in The Witcher 3, there are a lot of things you can say, like your dialogue options. And in some cases, it's a little clearer than I realized that they're like, "Do you want them to go with you or not?" And you go, "Well, I do, of course." But sometimes I'll go, "Oh, I don't." The other person just says something that makes them come with you anyway. You got to be your character, but the game still forced you in being companion with them. And I'm like, why do we so readily accept it otherwhere? So that's a total separate thing where I don't see a lot wrong with that if it's not done sort of maliciously. So if you prepare, this thing that happens and they go, "Oh, but that suspicious guard." I'm like, well, then he's holding the diamond instead of this other person. You know what I mean? You just move it over and you still do the same amount of prep. And the players feel like they can do anything and you don't have to break your back to do it.
And I definitely think that's an art form because I agree with you and I do the same thing. And I think that the part that is the point of contention is if you do that in a way where the players' choices feel as though they don't have weight.
Exactly.
So there's a difference between forcing something to happen because the players outsmarted you.
Yeah.
Or taking... And so I think a good way to kind of distinguish it is taking a moment and making the moment happen rather than an outcome.
Yeah.
So like saying, well, hey, listen, Jeff, using your exact example, that you want to have that dialogue with my character. And so a great game master, I think, says they let the game kind of play out naturally. And then when there's this sort of weird turn, it doesn't matter where we go. We could go to the marketplace. We could go to the palace. We could go to, and that just is going to act as the backdrop of the moment. And that moment is, oh, cool. Hey, now they're going to have that. They're going to do this thing. So it's like, I could see both sides to it, but I think in a game where, like you said, we're all having fun and we're all agreeing on certain matters of choice, it's kind of like that's part of it. Part of it is that we're all an improv troupe and we have to agree at least to some points, or else the wheels fall off the wagon.
Yeah, and I think it's just to sum it up succinctly, I think it's important. It's easy to railroad players that way, but the way I look at it, it's not a bad thing for the story to follow the players, even if they didn't follow what you thought the story was going to be.
Yeah, and I think you made an important distinction of, like, you know, it shouldn't be about forcing an outcome or, you know, something to happen regardless of the player's choice. You know, it's one thing to, like, you know, if you're going to have a scene of like two NPCs, you know, getting into a fight with each other and the players are just going to see that and have to choose to act, it doesn't really matter where that happens. You know, it could happen, like you say, in the marketplace, in front of the palace, next to the church. And like, that doesn't affect kind of what happens in the game, like where it takes place. So you can kind of put scenes like that anywhere. So if the players go left when you thought they were going to go right, you can still move something like that over. But I think where a lot of people kind of get stuck with the choice thing is, you know, if we decide to set up a guard station at X place to prevent a thief from getting away, and then as the GM, they weren't expecting that. So then they make the thief get away anyways because that was what they planned. And it's like, that's when it's to be like, we did all this work to like set up this plan. We executed it well. There's no reason why it shouldn't have worked. And you're saying that it's not working anyways just because you want X to happen instead of Y. So I think, yeah, there is kind of a line that I kind of draw between, you know, prepping conclusions versus kind of being able to move scenes around to where you want them to be. But yeah, you kind of have to watch how you do it. There's always a line of moving stuff around freely where it makes sense, kind of putting the players where the action is no matter what, versus like maliciously kind of planning against the players and not letting their actions influence the story.
Yeah. And I think that is the most important thing, is that idea that if you are really going after the fun and you're making sure, you know, you're truly and sort of benevolently, I guess, you know, on the opposite end of maliciously, just saying, well, we're all here to see how this plays out. You know, it's like you don't have a stake necessarily in the thief getting away as the GM. So let the players catch him. You may not have expected it, but it's better because that should create more fun. They put the work in and they did something. And so I do agree that there is a whole sort of list of caveats to that idea and stuff. But if you treat it gingerly enough, you can do that. And again, it helps you prep because you don't have to account for everything the player's done, even if you've asked them what they want to do. Okay, well, we want to go to the palace. All right, well, there's this many things they can do, you know? So just use it sparingly. But like you said, as long as it's not against the players, it's usually not such a bad thing.
Sure.
Yeah, for sure.
And so I think, you know, one of the things I wanted to hit on too in this deep dive is there are two things that I feel like I do struggle with when I prep. And they're, the number one thing is that I feel like in a long running game, something that's multiple sessions, I have a problem with keeping the thread and making it feel like one long story. Like, I feel like I come up with this syndrome of like shiny new thing where it's like, okay, it's been a month, you know, we play like once a month. And so, all right, cool. Oh, you know what? I'm really into this show right now and this kind of feels cool. So I'm going to put these characters here. And sometimes I make it so that each session feels like a new one shot. And so how do you guys keep that newness where the players feel like they're doing cool stuff, but you don't feel like it's like episode one every single time, episode one of a show? So, you know, is there any tricks or tips you guys have for that kind of a thing?
Yeah, so for me, I think the thing that really has helped me as far as that sort of thing, because I know exactly what you mean of like, I'm the sort of person who kind of like drifts from influence to influence like pretty quickly of like, I'm all about samurai movies right now, so I want to put that into my session. But then, you know, 2 weeks later, I might be super into sci-fi, and I want to put that in, you know. So I totally understand that impulse. I think something that helps a lot with continuity is to focus on player-focused issues and keep those threads going through. And I think that can kind of help to make it feel like a little bit more of a cohesive thing. So if one of the player characters is struggling with, some aspect of, they're a cleric struggling with their faith, if you can kind of have a scene, expand on that, in session 2 and in session 3. So even if the events of the session are like much different of like, well, the first session they were, doing a caravan guard over here, but now session 2, they've like managed to work their way into this, church experience or whatever it is, something completely that seems totally disconnected. If you can find a way to kind of tie the characters to each other through those sessions, I think at least for me, that always helps a lot with continuity of like players kind of furthering their own goals and their own conflicts and their ties to each other, and kind of having the continuity be more about the party with each other and with themselves and kind of their own struggles and their own conflicts rather than a plot that, that they're tracking down. But that's kind of at least something that works for me. That's not everybody's style. Some people really like kind of a plot-focused game. So it kind of depends there. But it's kind of something that I think about a lot.
Yeah, and for me, for more of a plot-focused game, which I am actually a very big fan of, it's definitely drawing back the curtain a little bit. I mean, we're doing that a lot here, but in this case, this is like, maybe I'm overselling it, but it's one of those, it's hard to unsee once you see it kind of things. This happens a lot in video games, but I'm going to keep going back to that because that's where a lot of my experience, especially the quests and things, comes in. The Witcher 3 does this really well, where you look at the situation that is happening, that's not necessarily part of the plot, and you find a way for the plot to affect that. Because when you're playing, it feels like there's a whole world, but that's definitely a farce. It's all just what you're looking at that moment. It's like that set of the movie. And the reason I bring that up is because you can kind of prey on that a little bit, because nobody questions it when they go off on this tangent and they do this thing and then they find something, say a sword or maybe this magical item. And when they bring it back, somebody knows they have it. The person they were doing that is part of the plot asks them about it or knows they have it or they can track it, or like you go, okay, how can that be part of the plot? How can what is happening now be the thing? And you go, oh, well, that person wants it, or this other person that they know is looking for it. And it feels a little bit like cheating. I don't think there's really any such thing, but it is a little bit like almost seems too easy. But sometimes I'm like, oh, well, they went in that mine and stuff. Well, I'm just going to make sure that in that mine they find a thing that someone else wants, or they run into somebody, or they find, the body of an NPC that they were supposed to be doing a quest for. And, it's like, if you just inject parts of the overarching plot into what is happening, it constantly feels like the plot is happening. Or at least if you do it well. Obviously, you could overdo that, but you can definitely get away with a lot in that sense.
Yeah, and you bring up something really important, kind of a last thing on my end for this. It's just like something that I think a lot about for my games is I'm someone who cares a lot about like the tone and the feeling of a game, of like, what do I want this game to feel like? What's this experience supposed to, be about in terms of like super big picture stuff? So if the point of this game is to explore, a noble house's inheritance, amidst a struggling, collapse, like the house is on the brink of collapse. They're trying to regain their former glory. Any event can wildly differ from the specific tone and inspiration, but if you can find a way to tie it back into like what the game is about in a major way, of like, this game's all about survival, a tough environment that's trying to kill you, trying to live through that. How do you do that? So if session 1 is surviving pirates and session 2 is in the wilderness in the desert, starving, you can kind of tie both of those things back to surviving difficult, harsh environments. And if you can kind of make it feel, towards the same direction, then I think kind of the individual elements can be pretty disparate. But if they can be tonally tied together, then it can feel like the same story, even if they might otherwise be what would feel like unrelated events.
Yeah, I think that's really smart. So it's almost like, and that actually helps a lot, because based on what the both of you are saying, like James, what you're saying is tie stuff together, which it makes a lot of sense. But basically, in addition to that, looking through the right lens to start with, I think is something that I struggle with, really. So if I have to identify what the problem is maybe I don't clearly define what the game is about or the feel. And so, by doing that and saying, well, survival. Now, looking through that lens, that's a very different situation, no matter where you are. So that setting doesn't really matter as much, but what you focus on in that setting. So like anywhere can have a water shortage.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's like, okay, cool. So it's survival. So if they head somewhere, it's like, okay, cool. All right, well, in this next town, it's going to be right now, everyone's really skittish and they're very unwelcoming of outsiders because there's a food shortage. Well, now there you go. That is going to feel like the game. The details can really shift around, but at least it won't feel like, like you said, Jeff, samurai and then sci-fi. You can do that as long as it's survival. If now I just to use a crazy example of things that probably shouldn't work, the first game was this crazy sci-fi derelict ship, and then, it's survival and it crashes, and oh, okay, God. And then when they come upon this town, it is this sort of Asian-inspired samurai code, and so they're fighting. It's still survival, but there's a shortage of food. So the conflict is, it's survival. You do not have food. You will starve. But they're fighting their sense of honor versus their sense of survival. At what point does honor tip over into, dying over it? And are you willing to do that for your honor? Boom. Now you got a story, and it's survival based, so it feels like it's part of the campaign.
Yeah, and I think
there you go.
If you go even more plot focused than tone focused, like even further, I see this a lot. I mean, this is literally how television shows works. My favorite example that I think we've talked about before, and I know Tim knows, is Justified, the TV show. It's a show that I really love, but they do a thing where if they ever need a character, they use one that you've met before. And this works so well in D&D because, or any RPG really, because you don't have to describe a new NPC and they don't have to take notes on them again. And they feel like they live in the world because the guy from the first session comes back in the sixth session. So basically, if you create this cast of characters of you have the players and some of the people the characters can meet, just keep making it those characters. If it's the same 10 people, again, saying it like that makes it seem like it would be so trite and contrived, but really the players just feel like they start to get to know people and things start to make sense. And they feel good when the merchant from the first session comes back because they have a shared history and stuff. And now there's some rapport there, So I think that, like I said, you can really get away with making it feel like a plot, even if they go way off the record or way off the reservation, or you just kind of toss in a few things there that are familiar and you're kind of giving them that feel anyway.
Yeah, and you can even start to tie like all of those things in together of just like, maybe in session one, the question is like, well, what are you willing to do to survive? And that's kind of the question that you ask throughout the game. Like you say, session one is a crashed ship, and maybe they help this merchant off this ship at their own expense. They give something up that might be risky, in the world because survival is so important, and they help this guy out. And then, session four, it's the question is still, what are you willing to do to survive? But now it's this food shortage scenario. And maybe the merchant that they help in session one is willing to give up some of their food in session five back to the party because they helped him back in session one. And so you can kind of start to like use these theme cohesions and these character cohesions and start to tie them together into these kind of storylines that you can start to build around what it means to live in this world and how the party acts. And you can, plus it makes the things that they do matter later, which I think is always important too. Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah, and I think the major thing to remember there that took me a while to come to terms with is you don't have to plan that from the start. And that's sort of the major takeaway is that you do it as it goes because you don't know where they're going to be in session 5. So as long as you have that cast of characters, it will feel like you planned it from the start if you do it right. But you don't have to burden yourself with trying to plan a television show with a cast that is going to do whatever the heck they want because it's an RPG.
Yeah, no, it's true. And I think so a good way to make it easy to do that, and this is something I started doing, I don't take like really great session notes, and that's probably one of the reasons why.
Yeah.
So I'm like, but what I have started doing is when something major happens, I make a note of it while it's happening so that it's like I have a character who if I need it, I'm like, I remember that this person killed a person. And so that's a big event. And so you just go, oh, so-and-so killed so-and-so. It doesn't maybe matter in the session apart from the normal D&D, like, oh, wow, the person is dead. But that is a really cool thing so that when you're flipping through, you can go, oh, let's see. We haven't really focused on Jeff's character in a little while. What do I got here? Oh, that's right. Jeff killed someone. Okay, cool. I'm going to bring that back. And you don't even have to exactly decide, but you're like, it makes it feel like there are consequences in the world. The other thing is if you don't do that, the big things like I have a character who they lost their eye to a werewolf in one of the games I'm playing. If that doesn't come up again, it'll always feel like it didn't matter.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's kind of like, oh, good, lost my eye to a werewolf. I lost my arm to a vampire. Like, who cares? But if you, if it comes up later, like immediately I'm like, and I haven't thought of this until just now. I'm like, okay, there's going to be a werewolf hunter that I'm going to send after them. That's just got to happen. And it's going to happen like 4 sessions from now, way when it doesn't seem like it would ever be. But a person who comes in, I'll wait until there needs to be someone with an opposing conflict. And I'll go, there's a werewolf hunter that actually just outbid you on this boat ride and now you're stuck here or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, stuff like that, like, I think can often tell a better story. Like, I think a lot of GMs kind of start to worry about, like, well, what, like, single, like, story arc am I, telling about this game? And that's a totally fine way to run your game. I'm not trying to knock that. But at least, like, for me, it's so much more satisfying as a player to have, like, I killed a guy in session 1, and, now I meet his family in session 4 who's struggling because I killed them. Like, that to me is, like, so much of a better story than, like, the Dark Lord is doing whatever and we have to, do whatever to stop them. Because this is like, I'm part of one of those stories. Like the other one, I'm just kind of reacting to or interacting with. But, one of them, I'm living that story. I'm experiencing it as it unfolds and kind of seeing that my actions have consequences, and that the things that you do in a game can matter. And at least for me, there's like no better feeling as a player than when the GM does take note of that sort of thing and say like, oh, that thing you did 3 sessions ago that you thought was, whatever, it turns out was a serious deal, and it's changed the world that you're in because you did that, and now you're going to have to live with that for better or for worse. Like that for me is like, it's just so satisfying as a player to have those either in good or bad ways. Like you do something amazing and something great happens later, or you do something terrible and it catches up to you. And using those as prep elements, I think is like such an easy way to move through, session after session of just like, you can constantly kind of build upon those things and start to kind of build those narratives. Like you say, you don't know that it's going to happen ahead of time. But it's just like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if the thing that you did 2 sessions ago actually mattered? And now you have to deal with that. Plus, that's one more scene you don't have to like prep, offhand and pull out of nowhere.
Yeah, you're like, hey,
ready for you, yeah.
And I don't want to cut the conversation short on this particular thread, but I also feel like I wanted to give you guys an opportunity, if you wanted to throw out anything that maybe you struggle with when you prep. Is there anything that you wanted to add to what we were just talking about? And then if not, I don't know, one of you guys hit me with like, what's your deal? What's your biggest thing that you struggle with where you're like, oh, I did it again?
Yeah, I do have one more thing, because I think that you started us on a really good path of kind of plot-driven prep and how people struggle with that. And as long as we're happy with kind of continuing that, I have something that I have done in the past that really helps me to keep track of all of that, even over 5, 6, 7 sessions.
Yeah, please.
So what I do is when I prep my first session, I write sort of an outline of the things that, those scenes like we talked about before. Okay, there's this person, just very high level. And then each time I prep another session, I read over what I had written, and based on what the players do, I'll add notes. So it's literally just a bulleted list, like an outline. But I go, okay, so they can go to, they can go in the mines, and they can go left to where they process stuff and they meet this person, or they can go right and do this other thing. obviously I would prep those things and they'd be a little less nebulous. But when they do make one of those decisions, I then put it in the document. So it's almost like I can take the notes more easily because I do so after the session. But that's where I would put my Jeff's character killed so-and-so. But it fits right under because they went left in the mines. It's almost like I can follow it back up to see why it mattered to the story. And then when I prep the next part, I do the same thing, but I can always just kind of, for lack of a better phrase, or literally exactly what I do, scroll up and see, oh yeah, in the mines, he killed this guy, but now all of these plot things are here. And that allows me to, it's basically my high level view. And if I can help it, I'll never create a new NPC. And after a few sessions, you kind of have your cast. And if you stick with those, and I do it that way, where even 3 weeks later, I go, oh, well, this and this happened. It's basically like a little flow chart of exactly what happened, and it allows me to tie it all together really well. And so, yeah, I just wanted to throw out that style of prep for me helps me not come up with new stuff as well.
So I guess mine is, I'll frame it this way, because I don't know if this is like a me problem or if it's a thing that a lot of people experience. So I don't know how applicable this would be kind of on a wide scale. But because like a lot of my sort of prep style is very improvisational, like I very much kind of like that free flowing form of like, do you guys ever have issues where you'll prep something out and then you'll get to that moment and then just like do something completely different instead? Like for no reason, not because the players made a different decision, but just like, all right, they walk into town, I have this NPC prepared, they're going to show up, they're going to say this, they're going to do this. And then you get there and it's like, and then the bandits attack. It's like, what, why did I say that? Like I threw myself off with my own doing something unexpected. Like, so I don't know if that's something that is a me thing because my brain works very strangely like that, or if that's something that you guys have ever dealt with too. But yeah, I guess if you have prep, how much do you care about sticking to it in the moment? And if you do care, like what do you do to kind of prevent accidentally drifting from your own prep? Because I do that a lot.
I do the same thing. So I'll say this. I don't have an answer for you other than this was probably a good thing to hear, because what it stems from for me is I feel a lack of confidence in what I've prepped. And so, it's like, I'm used to it. I forgot that 4 days ago when I had the idea, it was so cool. So I'm used to the idea. So to me, it's an old idea. And so I'm like, I got to do something. The reason why this is terrible is because it hamstrings all the rest of the prep that I had. Now that the bandits have attacked, you have completely dropped a boulder in the puddle. The ripples are going to go for hours. There's no like, okay, we're just going to do a quick bandit fight. So it nullifies the rest of the prep in a lot of ways. So I would say this was a cautionary tale for me to say, no, stick to your prep, because what I have problem is one-upping everything. It's like it constantly has to escalate, because if the bandits attack in the first scene, then you might have the tendency to go, and then the big bad guy shows up because he's in town. He's just visiting, and you're like,
and throwing the prep out. Why not?
Yeah, you're like,
you can think of,
and you're thinking in the back of your mind after you say it, you're like, why did I just do that? They're like, oh, if he's here, can't we just get the stone? And you're like, oh my God, they can just get the stone.
Oh God, the stone.
Yeah, so trust your prep, I would say. And it's okay to change it, but don't be like, and fireworks, explosions, there's a bomb on the wagon. For me, it's lack of confidence because the idea is 4 days old, but it'll be brand new to the players.
So I think that I personally have a little bit of a solution. I don't do that a ton, but there have definitely been situations where something that the players did that I didn't prep for, that's not necessarily changes what I wanted to happen. But for example, a player got into an altercation with a bandit out front and I didn't plan on that. So it makes sense to me now for the bandits to come in, because that makes the world feel more alive, even if it's outside of what I prepped necessarily. For me, I do just bump everything down the line. Now, you can't do this all the time, and it depends on how you prep. I tend to prep in a way that you put a lot of stuff out there. I say out there, but like in the prep document, or you write down, you think, okay, these are all things that I'd like to see. You know, the bartender's got this secret, and I don't even know what it is now, but maybe it's a magic item that he has. I'm going to keep that in my pocket. And I do a few various things like that. So I can still use a lot of that prep if the bandits show up in this exact example. Because again, if you just go hard left, like if the big bad guy shows up, I'm like, there isn't a lot of saving it. There's sort of a limit to how much it works. But for me, I just push it all down because I go, okay, well, the bandits attack. And I look at the rest of the stuff I had prepped and I go, okay, how does that change it? If they were supposed to talk to an NPC here in this tavern, well, they can't do that now. The NPC may leave. They may help them fight. They may not. But I make sure that whatever mattered in my prep changes to fit what's happening. So in that case, I'm like, okay, well, I'm gonna make sure the NPC comes up, whether he helps them, maybe. And if I'm improving this, I'm like, maybe he gets hit. He gets caught in the fray. You know, a stray arrow hits him. One of the players did it. Now, if they know they were supposed to talk to this guy, you say that happens when they're in the middle of the fight. They go, oh crap, maybe we should have tried to not have this happen in this tavern because there's collateral damage. And that was our contact kind of thing, you know? So that same kind of thing where if you just leave a few little, I see it visually, so a little divots almost of where you can plug other things in, just about anything can happen, but you can take something that you did prep and still plug it in and get away with it depending on how far you go, you know, left or right.
Yeah, and even a bit of self-editing that I've started doing because I know that I do this sort of thing a lot is like, I never prep more than like the day of or the day before a game. Like I never prep earlier than that, just because I know that if I prep something a week ago, by the time that I run the game, you know, the next Saturday, that like I won't want to do any of those things anymore. So it's just like I've literally had to like build in my own workarounds because I know like it's happened too many times where I'll literally have the document open, scene one, it's supposed to be this, and then I'll start the game and just like the NPC that I plan to introduce there, I just won't put them in the scene. I'll put something else in, like, and it's just like, and not even out of a mistake, like I forgot, like I'll just decide to do something different. Like I'll just start talking and then I just keep talking and then things are suddenly different than, you know, the way that I.
Yeah, dude. I genuinely think it's the way to solve it is what you said, because if you have a week to think about it, like I said, you've already seen that episode in your head and it's done. So it's almost like you get to live with the information long enough to where it feels like it's resolved maybe. So you have to one up your own storytelling need because that has already come to fruition in your head. You're like, oh yeah, well that character, well, we know that happened. So then what? And then, so I think it's important to remember what is fun for people at the table. And that's going to be different for everybody. For me, like my favorite sessions are the ones where we're just sitting around and talking as our characters and doing stuff. And so, and we've talked about this as a through line, we don't have to, as game masters, we don't have to feel the need to set everything on fire for it to be fun. And it doesn't have to be trumped up to 11 so that it's exciting. Sometimes the quiet moments of Jeff's character and Tim's character talking about that emotional tie is the thing we'll remember about the campaign for 5 years. So I think you have a good workaround. Prep the day before. And then here's my new rule, and I'm going to use this. I'm just going to go with the prep. And then if I need to add stuff, I can. But, and I think maybe I'll throw that out there and say this. If you're listening to this and you get to I want to know in the comments, do you do this? I feel like this is something that all DMs do. And I want to know, I want to get to the pathos of it. I think it's because of the things I've mentioned. And I think we would be really surprised if we went with the prep and then added seasoning to it as needed rather than saying, steaks off the menu. It's fish tonight. You know, it's like, but we planned this whole everything around the steak. Like, yeah. So,
and I do think that you are getting to the root of that issue where to you it feels dated or you know, whatever that may be, where it feels like maybe you're just not feeling it. Like you said, Jeff, well, last week was you were into samurais, so that's why you did that. And now you're like, well, I'm kind of into this new thing and I want to do it. So absolutely. The funny thing is I haven't come across this much because in general, I tend to prep before the game because that makes the most sense to me. I never really thought about it. It's not necessarily procrastination, but I prep a few days before because I have a lot of other stuff to do, and it doesn't make sense for me to do the thing that I can wait on. You know what I mean? Obviously, that can be dangerous if you are bad at procrastination. But the other part of that is it is very important to remember to just keep reminding yourself the players are here to have fun. They have no idea what's going to go on. They're thinking of their own characters. It's kind of like in high school. Maybe this doesn't apply to everybody, but in high school, you think that the pimple you have, everybody's staring at. But if you think about it, all the other people have their own thing that they think you're staring at, and they don't have enough time to realize you have a pimple. And so I lean on that a lot in life, but also as a GM where I go, if I catch myself, oh man, that's not as cool as I thought it was, I go, but I trust the players and they're going to make it cooler. Also, they're not for an instant going to think, they are wondering how they're going to react and what check they can do. And they're curious about what's under the table. They're not going to think, oh man, when he was prepping that, he must have been really into samurai movies, or, oh man, that's probably not as cool as I'd hoped. They got their own stuff going on. So they're going to run it for you, So I just try to remember that and really keep that in mind when my impulse is to go, you know what, steaks off the menu.
Does that help at all, Jeff? I mean,
Oh, yeah. You both made some really good points there. And I think it's just something that I need to be more disciplined about. It's just like, no, this is what I decided. I decided it for a reason, and that like, if I trust myself in any capacity, I should trust that reason was a valid one, or else I wouldn't have used it, sort of thing.
Yeah.
But I think you both say a lot of good points there.
That's a very good way to put it, because I trust myself a lot, sometimes to a fault. And again, in life too, but you put that really well, because that's what I say. I go, okay, well, I trust me. So if I were going to put that thing away today, where would I have put it? Because I can't find something, I'm like, well, it'd probably be here. Okay. But it's the kind of thing where if I've made a decision, I'm like, I don't have enough brain power to worry about it again. So if I go, I guess I decided to schedule that this week. I don't remember why I did that, but clearly there was a reason, and I didn't want to waste the brain power remembering that reason. So I'm just going to go for it because I trust me. That 99% of the time works out. 1% of the time you're like, what the fuck was I thinking? You know what I mean? Like, you have no clue, but usually it's pretty good.
Yeah, I think you also bring up a really good point about trusting the players to like make the best of anything anyways, and that sometimes the best thing for a scene is what the players will do to it, not what you will do to it, and that it's okay to just like let a scene breathe. Like it's like sort of tangential, but just a flag that I want to plant that I think, Tim, you said a little bit earlier, just like plan downtime. Like, it's please just like plan like,
Yeah.
all right, you're all around the campfire, nothing is happening. What do you do? Like, like that is a scene in itself worth having. And especially as a GM, if you feel stuck, to just be able to pull that out is sometimes the best thing that you could do, even better than anything else that you could plan.
Yeah, and I think underestimating the players is something that we do a lot because of, and Jeff, you just said it, James, you mentioned it, which is they have a world going on in their own minds, and the lens that they're looking through, they will always do what you aren't expecting. So sometimes it's okay to start off down here because they're going to bring it up here, just with their actions and their mode and what they're doing, and then add 3-4 people to the mix, and you've got a lot going on already. So one of the things that kind of hit me was in what you just said, I want to add to that, which is in your prep, have a downtime scene. A really good way to do that is by framing it in a specific way so the players are set up to feel like it's okay to sound like they're talking about themselves or doing a thing. So this is actually a good friend of mine, Matt Click, good friend of all of ours. He's very good at kind of either an intro scene or like in a downtime scene, he will give you a frame of reference because there's a little bit of a danger in, okay, guys, there's nothing to do. The players might have idle hands and start being like, oh, hey, now would be a good time to go invade that fort. And you're like, whoa, I just meant like for 20 minutes. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'll give you an example. As you prepare your campsite, you think about what you're going to have to do tomorrow. You're certainly going to have to face the Jotun and the full force of their devastating front line. You know that you have to get rest tonight, but you're restless. What are you doing as you both have to rest and prepare for this battle tomorrow? That's a totally different answer, because I framed it up in, some way to then, well, my character would specifically do this and this. I think it's also cool to take it way back to the beginning. That's a really good way to keep the lens of what is the session about. If it's about survival, I just drop in a seed of, you weren't able to find much, if any, food. So your bellies are all empty. You don't have much water. Like, already, it's a totally different scene. And so maybe that's a good way to do it, where it's like kind of focus on that. But I just wanted to throw that out.
To tie it back around to the very, very beginning, if that's also a good way to kind of frame in, like, asking players scenes that they want to have in the session, and then kind of using that method that you say to, like, kind of orient the scene around that. It's like you say, if you just say, like, you're all here, nothing's happening, like, it's easy for it to kind of go wherever. But if you say, Tim, you're sitting next to Jeff's character, the thought of that, the death of your mutual friend at the end of last session is weighing heavy on your heart. Is there anything that you want to say, to express that? If you had already come to me as the GM and said, like, I want to have a scene with Jeff's character about this connection that we had, now you can kind of, it tells everybody at the table that, like, this is what this scene is meant to be for. It's not meant to, go off and, gallivant through the woods. It's so that these people can talk about this thing. I think that the method that you say there is fantastic for all those things. Like, it just kind of helps orient those otherwise kind of free flowing scenes to specifically what you want the scene to be about in a really cool way.
Yeah. And I think by framing it that way, in my opinion, I kind of patternize a lot of things. And so for me, that's effectively the same as saying you go into a church and there's bandits. You set the scene. What do you guys do? Yeah, they can turn around and leave, but they're in initiative. They can't, you know what I mean? Like, they're going to follow you. And just like you don't know how long a battle with bandits is going to be, if everybody sits down around the fire, they didn't have a lot of food or water, but nobody kind of has anything, that's okay. You still have that downtime. You get a minute. It might turn into 20 or 30 minutes of really good role play. It might be a few minutes of, I'm sharpening my blade and I can't wait to fight the Jotun, that we have to tomorrow. And I'm just thinking, everybody gets like a little snippet and then you move on. It's totally variable in length. And I think that a lot of times people consider stuff like that a little outside of the game and a little less gamey. But it's important to remember that, no, it all is still a scene. Again, it's just like combat. There's not mechanics to that scene you want to have, but again, the players, like you said, Tim, looking through that lens are going to make it good. You as the GM don't have to worry about that part. It's kind of hands off,
Yeah. Then they get to do their thing or talk about the thing that's important to them without feeling like they're stepping on anyone's toes. If they want to talk again about the ancestral blade that their mother gave them, it makes perfect sense. And they're not like, ugh, you're not eye rolling because you're like, listen, again with the knife, or whatever. It's like, yeah, it makes sense now. And now all the players are like, oh, yeah, man, that's really cool. So, well, excellent. Well, I think that's pretty much it. Was there anything else you guys wanted to hit on before we wrap up?
No, I think that was pretty solid. Yeah, that was great.
Yeah.
Killer.
I think we're good.
All right. Well, this has been Tabletop Terrors. As I mentioned, in the comments, I would love to know basically anything, whether it's good, bad, ugly, about your prep. What do you do? What do you struggle with? And maybe we'll try to have a follow-up episode where we maybe even answer some questions. So if you have specific questions about prep, you can put those in there. We're all about fun, creativity, and tabletop RPG. So if you like that, I highly recommend subscribing. And, we're going to continue to make videos like this, hopefully as much as we can in the foreseeable future. So anyway, thanks so much, and we'll see you next time. I guess we'll actually know. So let's do a Tabtarian toast.
May you mend the first break.
May you kill the first snake.
May you conquer everything that you undertake.
Sláinte.
Sláinte.
Sláinte.